Hi, welcome to Moneycontrol. Over the last 75 years, if you look at it, most of the growth has come during 60s, 70s, some part in the 70s, 80s, 90s. And most of these economies, the US, Europe, have grown after the Marshall Plan. Then from the oil crisis, they emerged and grew again. And then the 80s was a growth period, the miracle of the Han River, the Japanese economy miracle, the Asian miracle, all happened during that period. There's a common thread during this period from the 90s also. That thread is increased globalization. India is trying to grow at a time when economies are pulling back. An 8% growth is what is required. CII has projected 6.4 to 6.7%. Can India achieve its goal of Viksit Bharat? We have with us CII President and EY Managing Partner and Chairman India, Rajiv Memani, to talk with us more about this issue. Welcome to the show, sir.
Thank you very
Welcome,
much.
sir.
Thank you very much.
So, CII has projected 6.4 to 6.7% growth. We have to reach to the 8% mark. How can that be achieved?
Yeah, no. I think you captured it very well at the beginning. That we are living in a very globalized world, and in many ways things are relative. So if you compare India's growth relative to what's happening in the rest of the world, I think India's growth is very, very strong. I mean, I think this is probably third year in succession where we'll be the fastest growing economy in the world by some distance. Now, if you see that, then the second most important thing is, what is this? Is it a one-off thing? What is the strength of the balance sheet? What is the resilience of the overall economy? And if you look at all those parameters, then India, if you look at the macroeconomic trends, fiscal deficit, the total foreign exchange reserves that we have, fiscal deficit is trending down. Over the last few years, it's actually better than what the government has projected or set for itself. The exchange reserves are rising. I think we are close to $700 billion now in exchange reserves. If you look at the health of banks, if you look at interest rates, I think they are at all-time lows. Inflation is very low. Bank balance sheets, gross NPAs, net NPAs are probably amongst the lowest. Then you come down to corporate balance sheets. I think they are also probably very, very strong in terms of debt to equity, return on equity, return on capital employed. And if you then come to the retail balance sheets, I think the retail balance sheets also are in reasonably good position. Yes, your pockets that always get challenged, and that's where the regulatory system works very well. So if you look at all the institutions that give resilience, whether it is macroeconomics, whether it's the central bank, the way they're supervising the system, banks, corporate balance sheets and retail balance sheets, how the capital markets are performing. Overall, the strength and consistency of policy, stability of policy is very strong. So you have for India to achieve Viksit Bharat, maybe even if it's 7%, nominal 10%, I think we are in good position. I think we should be able to achieve that. If you have a population growth of whatever 1 point some percent, it still means you're looking at 6 to 7% per capita income increase, 7 to 8% per capita increase, which is actually very good. And if you go forward, to achieve that number, there will be. I mean, this has been quite a remarkable year in the amount of trade turbulence that we have seen, and we've seen that in the last 6 months, and also the challenges on geopolitics. I mean, we are having a complete global reset of trade. We are having completely new economic partnerships around the world, and most of the global output patterns that you look at. So if you look at trade, trade will actually be negative this year as compared to 2%, 2.5% growth last year. So overall, there is a lot of global uncertainty, and business and uncertainty are not good friends. But in that scenario, for India to grow at 6.5%, I think it's truly commendable. Now, if you have a little bit of global tailwinds instead of such massive headwinds, then I think achieving 7% plus growth is not that difficult. 2 years back, India did achieve 9.2% growth. So I would say that you'll have years in which you will have maybe 6.5 to 7% kind of growth, and then there will be some years where you'll be closer to 7.5%. So at an average, over the next 5 to 10 years, if we can do 7% growth, that should be fine. There are some things that India will have to address to get this growth going. Obviously, one thing that as you have growth, it's also important that the growth is more even, and the economic inequality is lower, because that's very important for the growth to get into a virtuous cycle. And I think that's something that we have to see how we drive that, because once that happens, then consumption and other things come into play. And the second thing is that reforms are very continuous reforms are very important, not big bang reforms, but just small little things and maybe some big things, which will ensure that you always keep on going to the next orbit of competitiveness, new opportunities that come. So as long as we have these two things playing, I think there is no reason why India should not be growing.
You've spoken about the next gen reforms that are needed to increase their competitiveness.
Yeah.
What should be the immediate reforms that the government and industry should focus on? And we are also estimated to become the third largest economy. So how do we add that to the gross value added?
Yeah, so I would say that the reforms that are right now, which as you know that the government is also very keen to uh, uh, push through, and they've set up a high level committee which cuts across various ministries and also states, because the next level of reforms will be much more in states, and also it's not related to one ministry but multiple ministries. Uh, so I would say anything that enhances India's competitiveness and also enhances the speed of doing business. Those are the reforms that we really need. And when I say competitiveness, a lot of them will be around land, energy, logistics. So whatever enables that and helps reduce the cost of that, and a lot of these things, as I said, are small little things, not big bang things. A lot of these things are things that have to be done at a state level. If you want, I can list down a few. Then how do you, the speed at which business can be done, so that India is seen as a more investor-friendly destination, and people can plan better. So whether it's NOCs, whether it's clearances, whether that's environmental clearances, all those are very important. So you need reforms in these two buckets, so that fundamentally manufacturing becomes more competitive in India. In many ways, things have been improving, but we are still at that 12.5, 13% to GDP, and that has to move out. Aspirationally, it should go closer to 25% if you have to achieve the full potential. You talked about gross value added. India's gross value add globally, if you look at global output at roughly about $18 trillion, India's gross value added is roughly about 2.8%. China is 28.9%. So we have to find a way that we gradually move forward. And every 0.5% increase that we have in the India's contribution to gross value added, whether it's domestic or it's exports, will almost have a 2% impact on the increase on the manufacturing to GDP ratio. So I think that's a big, so reforms that are directed towards that are extremely important. And then a slew of other measures. For example, if you look at gross value added, one of the biggest success stories, if you look at last few years, has been electronics manufacturing. From being importers of mobile phone to starting to export to starting to increase the gross value add that we are having.
Yeah.
I think with some companies, almost 20 to 30% of their production is being done in India. So I think like uh, mobile phones, other electronic components, we also need to look at how do we get into gross to the value chains of some other products, whether it is garments, clothes, shoes, aerospace, defense, all these areas, and how do we ensure that India government and business proactively work in getting some of the leading players into India, and most of them are quite keen to work to India, but obviously making them competitive to be in India, ensuring that the entry process is smooth, because once they enter, the experience has been that the most of the companies who have set up manufacturing in India find it a very competitive place to manufacture. So we have talked to companies that have been here for 10 years, companies that have been here for 5 years, companies that have been here for 15 years. Most of them have found their experience, once they settle down, their experience of manufacturing competitively is very, very strong. And is very good. So I think, main thing is how do you attract some of the key players, build the ecosystem around it, and then industry after industry, we find a way to target that. And now obviously there's a big issue on supply chain resilience, and how do we ensure as a country, we are not dependent on any country or a few countries on critical supply chain issues, and that also can enhance value add in India, can enhance India's competitiveness.
Because you were talking about two things, let me put two questions to you and I'll segue into the second one. The first is regarding the factor market reforms, because you were talking about it in your previous press conference also that you held about. What's the best way of going forward with that? Two, when you talk about resilience and supply chain, a lot of it comes from innovation as well, research and development. Government's concern has been that the industry has not been doing enough in that regard. So what do you believe is the gap there? Do we need an R&D linked incentive scheme like we have an employment linked incentive scheme now?
Yeah. So let me. So the first question was, how do we do the factor market reforms? I would say what the government has set up today in the high-powered committee to look at this is probably the right way to look at it, because it requires a lot of state engagement. So if you look at land, how do we make more land available for manufacturing? Right now, a lot of the land is locked up in different areas, different places. If you go to many states, some states will have 10 to 15 different categories in which land can be used. Some states have 45 to 50 different categories. So how do you standardize that into 3 or 4 categories so that more land gets available and it's easy to acquire land in then digital, how do you record all the land and everything, recorded digitally, titles are clear. People don't have to spend 6 months, 8 months in figuring out whether the title is right or wrong, and then later on find out maybe the title is not right. And the government has incentivized states with interest-free loans of 50 years to say, okay, if you can. So in an ideal world, in a click of button, you can actually identify, this is the land I want, are the titles in place, what's the cost, government and everything else, how do we offer that? Third is, a lot of land in India is with private sector. Not all the land is with government. So how do you make it easier for private sector to be doing land? Can we also start looking at, both for government and private sector, long-term leases? So rather than selling land, can we do a long-term lease model so that it becomes easier, particularly for MSMEs? How do we allocate land specifically for MSMEs? A lot of land is locked with government entities, PSUs, PSCs. Can we find and ways that those land can be unlocked? Obviously, some of them have title issues, some of the other issues, some of those units are sick. But if the government gets down to it, they can easily find unlocks for that. Then you have the government had the industrial park policy. The faster we can roll that out, they have already identified. And if it's digitally available to someone who's looking at land, specifically if you're an MSME, that okay, if I need land in the Delhi Bombay freight corridor, what are the industrial parks available? What is the land available? What's the cost of it? Is the land title clear? And likewise, so FSI varies from state to state, from 1.5 FSI to 4 FSI. So can we ensure that we have, if 4 FSI is possible, then can we have 4 FSI across states? Because then suddenly unlocks a lot of built up area that you can build. Even on 1 acre, 2 acre of land, you can do a lot of that. So many things like that. And likewise, if you look at on labor, yes, the main, what the center wanted to pass, has not been passed as yet. But there's no reason why some states cannot adopt the key features, not only in their states, but also in the industrial parks. So if I create a textile park, or if I create a park for chemicals, can I implement those labor laws that are there, which are specific to those industries in that? So likewise, you can have on logistics, probably, as you know, that the government has invested massively in logistics. But can we build more dedicated freight corridors and other things? We are having the Delhi Mumbai, there were 3 or 4 other DFCs that were announced. Can we look at building that? So in each of them, It's not that the government is not working. I think a lot of work has been done. And if you see, logistics costs have come down, energy costs have come down. Now you have more and more pockets of land that are available. But we need to just give, if you want to turn manufacturing on its head, then you just need to be working at probably a much more rapid pace. And some states have a great opportunity of actually stepping up and ensuring that these things are done. And then how do you communicate that to sort of broader investor group? And I think some states through their investor conferences and others have been very proactive in doing that. To answer your second question on R&D, you're absolutely right. I think this is one thing which CII has been uh, advocating with its members. If you look at the R&D expense ratio as a percentage of sales, India is probably amongst the lowest amongst the advanced countries. So that's something. Got a separate group. We are passionately sort of going to each and every sector, industry, and talking about it. We are also trying to see how there can be better participation and better coordination between some of the government research institutions, also with some of the universities and academia, that how can there be better industry participation between various entities and units of government and educational institutions. So hopefully that also brings in more R&D. I think the government, for the longest time, I think industry has been asking for R&D, but the new scheme that the government just announced in the budget earlier, and they detailed it out here, I think that's a very landmark scheme. The government has allocated close to 1 lakh crores in providing them in long-term loans at a very nominal interest, or in some cases almost zero interest. So if that can be implemented rapidly, then I think the speed at which R&D activity, at least industry will not have the excuse that the money is not available, or we are carrying too much of risk, because government is sharing a little bit of that risk by giving very long tenured loans. So even if it takes 3 years, 5 years, 8 years for that research to start from ground zero to build to get into a product, at least that, there is capital and there is funding that's available for that. So I think that is very positive. I think the key is really to get it off the ground quickly and to ensure that we have rapid disbursement. And from CII's standpoint, talking about this scheme with our members, pushing it hard, engaging with the government so that the next steps on these schemes are taken up quickly, I think that will be very good. So, and the government has announced some other schemes also for different sectors. So I would say that to be fair, I think the government has been doing more than its part in trying to push industry and remove the bottlenecks for research.
One of the concern is slowing exports. We are in the times of global trade reset, as you said, and now all the focus is on the bilateral trade agreements. Now, the one of the major bilateral trade agreement, the India-USBTA, that we are expecting to close very soon. How do you view that? What are the expectations, and especially in the EV and auto sector, are there any apprehensions?
Okay, so I would say, I mean, exports have done well, relative to um, what's happening globally. I think Indian exports have fared well because we always look at Indian, and if you look at the non-oil exports, the non-oil exports have actually done well. Service exports have stacked up very well. So I think I won't say that the Indian export picture is not good. It's good. Obviously, if you compare that with some of the other countries, particularly in East Asia, I think India has still some ways to go. The On the trade agreements, and particularly talking about the US trade agreement, I would say the first thing is the speed at which the government has moved on this is really commendable. The amount of engagement that they have done with industry, different sectors of industry, different sizes of industries, whether it's SMEs, MSMEs, larger companies, understanding what their concerns are, what the issues are on the ground, also engaging with different ministries to ensure that quite a few ministries are involved in this so that they are very clear. I think the homework and detailing has been very strong and very good. Industry, I would say, is keen that government does the FTA, because there is a concern that I would say there are two concerns. One is obviously the tariff rate of whatever 26% kicking in. And secondly, you also want to look at relative competitiveness. So India wants to ensure that, given the size of the market that India offers, given the strategic relationship that it has with the US, and the complementarity of the relationship, that India gets probably a deal which has to be fair to both the countries, but relative to the other countries, at least Indian industry has a competitive advantage through that trade deal. So I don't think they're looking at entering the trade deal at any cost, but the relative competitive advantage as compared to the other countries has to be there. As far as sectors are concerned, I don't think it will be fair for me to comment on one sector versus the other. But if you look at an aggregate, I would say on balance, given the complementarity of the relationship, if the tariff rates are competitive relative to the other countries, particularly with which India competes with, I think it should be positive. From whatever I understand, there are not that many concerns of the EV and auto sector vis-a-vis US. I think the concerns could be with some other geographies, but vis-a-vis with US, of course, there is some worry concern if it comes down to a lower percentage. Then there is some concern, but it's not a significant concern with US relative to the other countries. But what I would say is that the government has spent a lot of time in understanding the needs of each of the industry. Also, the industry and associations like CII have spent a lot of time in communicating with the government and talking about experiences of other countries where there's been a certain tariff reduction. How have the other countries responded? And eventually, I think if you have to compete globally, tariffs will have to come down, and parallelly, industry also has to be more competitive. And as we talked about the various factors of production, they have to become much more competitive, and the tax structure in India has to be more competitive, so that India can, produce these goods. Because I have no doubt on the intellectual capability of India, the technical capability in India to be competitive in industry at a broad overall level, and the market opportunity that India offers is huge.
So one question, because we were talking about labor reforms as well. Employment-linked incentive scheme was just notified by the government, and CII welcomed that decision. Isn't there an inherent problem if there has to be an employment-linked incentive schemes in order to spur employment in the economy? One. Two, we are talking about employment at a time when rapid automation is also taking place. Does it make sense to talk about employment within that paradigm, given that other countries are using robotics and all and would emerge out in a with a more competitive advantage in terms of producing goods?
Yeah. No, if I, the first, CII had recommended the scheme, was part of our budget recommendations. So I think we're really grateful to government for them to, accept these recommendations. And now they've detailed it out as well. These are nudges. These are, and you can do nudges in various forms. You can do nudges by reducing tax rates. You can do nudges by providing tax breaks on investments. You can do nudges by providing direct relief like the R&D. And the other nudges, when you want when you want industry to focus on one area. So government's biggest concern is that India is a young country, for reasons that you mentioned. There will be pressure on jobs. So they want industry to be very focused on creating more jobs. Now, when you create more jobs, means that you have to add capacity, you have to do things, industry has to invest. So this is a way for government to say, if you are a labor-intensive industry, if you are hiring more people, then rather than for me to give you incentives on plant and machinery, I want to give you incentives on the number of people that you hire. And honestly, it creates the entire consumption engine going as you do that. So in some ways, the return for the government also, for every person that you hire, if you're paying him 50,000 rupees, 1 lakh rupees, he'll consume something. Probably you'll have GST on that consumption at 10 to 12%. On the tax above the marginal rate, you'll have 10 to 20% tax. So some of that money does come back to the government, but the encouragement is And the second thing is, if you actually see, a lot of employment growth in India has happened in the informal sector. This is a way to formalize this, because once the more you formalize, the more the other incentives, whether it's relating to health, pension, and others, start kicking in. So I think one of India's big challenges has been the formalization of almost 80% is in the informal sector. So I think the second thing is really pushing, incentivizing companies to formalize more of the hiring that they are doing. So I would say that's the reason. We really welcome it. I think it's a very positive move, and I hope industry laps it up and uses this money to hire, have a greater bias for hiring more. And the third area which you mentioned on AI and automation and how, I mean, you're absolutely right. That is why I would argue that you need more incentives, because and you need more avenues. AI is going to come, automation is going to come. It'll probably impact the services sector the first, technology, IT, healthcare. So if you can create more avenues by having more investments in the manufacturing sector, particularly labor-intensive manufacturing, then I think that gives, at least you create more opportunities. Opening up other sectors like particularly tourism, it creates more opportunities for employment, because yes, AI is coming, yes, robotics is coming, but India is the most biggest demographic advantage. Large percentage of population are still coming, joining the workforce. Almost 1.5 to 2 crore youngsters joining the workforce every year. So you have to find a way that more opportunities for them are created.
And what more nudges, before I go on to Meghna, what more nudges does the industry need now for it to achieve that goal, for that vision that is there?
No, I think industry has been pushing. I would say Indian industry has done well. See, I think we are in a very competitive world, and with some countries in the world, which India is particularly competing with, their cost of capital is almost zero. They support from government to invest, to take risk, to control things is very high. And for Indian industry is in the cold face of it. I mean, you are competing with them day in, day out, in India, and also competing with them outside. So that's why in particular areas, the government is looking at trying to see if they can get support on that. We've talked about employment related incentives. Government has talked about the internship scheme. We talked about R&D and other areas. Our tax rates and direct tax rates are very competitive. I think the one area which industry would value is if the GST rates can be rationalized. GST has been one of the most successful reforms that probably we have seen in independent India. The way states and center came, and also post that the way the government has invested in technology and in everything else to make that effective, I think has been great. But I think it's time to do the 2.0 version of response. So more simplification, particularly more simplification in the course of audits, more simplification in compliance. The purpose for which GST was set up was really that there is uninterrupted credit transfer. So to the extent that those lines are getting broken, whether because of input tax credit, whether because some items not being subsumed in GST, we've talked about land, petroleum, alcohol. If they can be included, I think that will be good. And also, rationalization of rates. So if we can, particularly those products which go into mass consumption, which benefit the 0 to 30%, bottom income of the 0 to 30%. If those products are that are going there, I think that is very, very important. At the end of the day, for India to succeed, the bottom pyramid of India has to have more income flows. They have to have better skilling. For India to achieve its economic ambition, if you ask me, that is probably the most critical thing.
You've taken away one or two questions from Meghna, but I'll let her ask.
You've spoken about the AI adoption and how the government has been focusing on job creation and all. Manufacturing is also, the government had come out with a lot of manufacturing schemes. We saw a great response in the electronic PLI. But how have you seen the other PLI schemes take off? What has been the impact, the utilization of the funds that were allotted? And do we still need more PLIs in some sectors?
Yeah. So if you actually look at it, whether you call it PLI or some in different names, the total incentive schemes that India has come out with over the last 3 to 4 years total up to roughly, I mean, the allocation for them totals up to about almost 3 lakh 30,000 crores in that range. Uh, and out of that, I would say about dispersal has been about 30,000 crores. No one knows the exact number, but if we look at each of the schemes and how much has been allocated, that's the number that one comes up with. So if you look at those two pieces, some schemes, as you rightly mentioned, electronics has been very successful. Semiconductor, which probably has the largest allocation, I think almost 75,000 crores. I think that, the initial uptake for companies coming in has been very strong. In drones, in the defense sector and others, we've seen good success. In pharma also, I think there has been good success. We probably can do much more on the API side. On the food and consumer products has been limited success, but there are some where the needle has not moved or not moved as much, and I think there we need to modify it a little bit, textiles being one of them. I think on auto and EV, I think it's picking up again, especially EV. The hydrogen piece is also picked up, but I think there is scope to do much more, because the entire supply chain for renewable manufacturing is very important that we develop that. So I think those areas we need to do that. Yes, I think we have to do more PLIs. I think it's a great way of incentivizing. The electronics has been a great case study of how a sector which was particularly almost non-existent in India, was completely picked up by India, doing the PLI scheme, linking in, getting some of the into the global value chains, getting some critical players into India, and then leveraging the PLI. I mean, I think we have the template of how that works, and especially I would say on labor-intensive sectors and on sectors which are relating to much more advanced manufacturing, and those sectors which are strategic to India, because you need the resilience in the supply chain. We should be using PLI plus a combination of other things to ensure that we move faster in manufacturing.
But in pharma, we had a few PLIs, but still we see the critical dependence still on China, on this pharma APIs. How do we navigate through that?
Yeah, I think pharma, honestly, we'll have to do more. And I think the strategy will have to be drawn up to say, we have seen what's happened on rare earth. If it happens in some of the API products, I think it will be a real challenge. And India has some really leading pharma companies, which are really have become big balance sheets, doing very well. So I'm sure with a little bit of support from the government, if we have a clear path of these other 8 items, 8 molecules or whatever that we have to develop, and we allocate to 3 or 4 or 5 companies, because obviously you need large companies, large balance sheets for doing it, and provide the incentive or PLI that needs to be provided for that. I think we should be able to go ahead with that. Now, some of them will be more like penicillin, and others are difficult, but I guess we'll have to bite the bullet there.
You just talked about renewables, and this is the last question from my side. Uh, CA at one of the events remarked that the Viksit Bharat goals comes before the net zero goal. It's 2047, this is 2070, and you need to look at development from that view as well. What is your view on that? Second, does the is CII pushing its members for setting up net zero targets as we move towards our 2070 goal? And does it need more support from the government, especially on the MSME side? Because who pays the bill for that? Because that's the lowest segment. The upper companies, the bigger companies can easily go ahead and adopt net zero. But the lower companies, they don't have the resources or the capital, as you said.
Yeah.
So how do you solve that conundrum?
Yeah. So I didn't understand your first question clearly, but let me answer the second, third. We can come back to the first one. So CII has a center of excellence, has various committees where we are working on byproduct with companies, especially MSMEs, on how they should look at net zero. What should be the definition of net zero? We are also engaging with the government to say, can we have a more standardized definition of what net zero is? So I think sustainability, renewable energy, green, I think these are big focus areas for CII and the center of excellences that have been developed. are probably best in class. So, so that's definitely there. On subsidies and everything, I would feel that at a company level, it'll be difficult. Uh, Generally speaking, I would say that um, in India, given the cost curves at which solar is coming, and even the latest bids that have happened on round the clock, whether that's using pump hydro or battery storage, the pricing is actually quite competitive. So yes, in some areas it's a challenge, particularly in hydrogen and some. That to the giving it to the manufacturer to ensure that he does it on an efficient basis will be more important. But I think Indian industry is strongly of the view that if you really want mass application of something, then it has to be competitive. So I think the industry is very driven to make it more competitive, and that's why the efficiency in transmission, the efficiency in the distribution system, trying to see how we can, for hydrogen, how do we build provide the PLI incentives so that we can start locally manufacturing electrolyzers and some of the other critical pieces. I think that's there. But I must compliment Indian companies in the way we have innovated. The more we can build the supply chain on renewable, on hydrogen, particularly in solar, wind, I think has developed is starting to develop well. I think the opportunity is huge, and I think there is a lot of work I think in the next 5 to 10 years will happen on nuclear. The policy, I mean, we saw in the budget. I think hopefully we see some amendments to the act that comes in, and then in the small modular reactors, I think there is things that can be done on a very competitive basis. So I would say, yeah, that is the way I would look at it. Viksit Bharat goal, yeah, it's in 2047. Renewable goal is higher. So yeah, it's a matter of fact. I don't know if there's
No,
was any sarcasm in that. Then I didn't understand
no,
it.
no,
So.
no. There was no sarcasm. I was just saying that do we need to be more prudent about our development goals before we rush for because there's a mad rush everywhere about net zero goals.
Okay. No, I think, as I, India, if you look at growth aspirations of India, uh, if India has to achieve its growth aspirations, and in a digital world, you talked about AI, if you look at data centers and others, your carbon intensity, if you use the normal parameters, would go crazy. It's impossible to meet that carbon intensity. So India has to have a low carbon intensity track for growth. So whether globally it's fashionable, not fashionable, I think what we have to do is we have to chart our own path of low carbon intensity growth. And we have to do it in a manner that it makes economic sense to do it. So I think the most important thing is how do we make it more economically viable and competitive to do it, whether it's through PLI schemes, whether it's through efficiencies in other areas, whether in terms of local adaptation of technology or local development of technology. I think those are the things by which we can make it competitive. From whatever I've heard in the last 5 6 years, if I look at various cost curves, most of them are trending down. So, there was not now, but maybe 10, 12 years back, solar energy was sold at 17 rupees or whatever. And now you see how it's dropped down. I'm sure hydrogen will start, not have the same this thing, but will gradually start dropping down. Wind is getting, the blades are becoming, PLI factors there are becoming much, much better. Hopefully there'll be more pump hydro, and the innovation in pump hydro for storage has made round the clock energy available much more competitive. Battery storage, and over a period of time how battery storage plays out. There's a lot of work that's happening. Obviously right now China is the leader in that, but in India a lot of things are happening. So I think if you look at various components of that, there is a lot of work happening to make it competitive. But we just, as I said, transmission, distribution, once you announce a tariff project, then the backup PPA for that shouldn't take 6 8 months. How do you ensure that the PPAs are available? And the resilience in the supply chain has to be there, so that you're not waiting for the products to come from some other country.
I think we can wind up with the last question that a government has been focusing a lot on ease of doing business for India Inc. There has been a lot of decriminalization and all. Do you think any further steps, maybe because the businesses have to go through multiple audits, maybe on that front, the government you might like to suggest something to the government? And also on the MSMEs front, the government has come out with various schemes, but What has been the implementation on the ground?
So I think there is a Jan Vishwas bill that came out, which was had lots of measures towards decriminalization. But I think CII believes that we should come up with a Jan Vishwas 2.0. We are talking to our members. We've identified lots of areas, especially those areas which are dealing with procedural violations or technical violations. Not to have criminal implications for that. So I think there have been a host of suggestions that have been given, and we continue to engage with the government on that. On MSMEs, I think we have to be particularly more careful because I think the MSME's ability to deal with so many compliances is very difficult. So therefore, with MSMEs, I think we will have to have a more liberal approach towards compliances. And I would say with the usage of technology, whether it is things like single window clearance, adoption of single window clearance. The government is not happy with the adoption of single window clearance, particularly at the center. Linking the center and state single window clearances, ensuring that all the center and state compliances are all collectively at one place. I think those are the areas which we need to work on to make it easier for MSMEs in particular, but also for the larger companies to ensure that compliance becomes more hassle-free than what it is today.
And the multiple audits, are you
Yeah,
suggesting?
multiple audits is on, I think, in various areas. One is the time limits for approvals. So many approvals are there for 1 year or 12 months or 18 months or 24 months. In many countries in the world, when we do global benchmarks, these approvals are given for 3 years, 5 years. So you don't have to go every 12 months, show up and say, I need an approval for this, this, this. So I think we have tabulated a list of that, and I think presented that to the government. On multiple audits, yeah, and particularly GST, something that we have said that if you're operating in 5 states, it doesn't mean you need to have 5 audits. You can have one audit and all the states can rely on that audit. We can have an unbiased process of identifying who that lead state is, and then everyone can, then it applies uniformly to this. And then after that, if there is, investigations after that. So I think the entire GST audit process is become very, very cumbersome. And I think that's something that we have to find a way to make it more efficient.
A 7% growth over the next decade would be good enough for India and would be good enough to achieve that Viksit Bharat goal. Moreover, the government needs to chart out its own path as far as the balance between growth and energy requirements are concerned. The PLI schemes have worked well, but India needs much more of them and much more schemes in order to provide enough nudges for the industry as well. Thank you, sir. Thanks
Thank you
for
very
coming
Thank
on
you
the
so
show.
much,
It
sir.
was
Thank
great
you very
talking
much.
to you.